Chapter 144 to 145. Shirou spent 3 days at Caerleon Castle, making the most of his time there. He gave speeches to raise awareness about himself and his cause, and also visited the camps of various kingdoms to interact with their leading knights and soldiers. The leading knights did not detect anything amiss, and found Shirou to be an enthusiastic and friendly individual. Lamorak, in particular, felt that Shirou was genuine and very likable. In fact, at times he had to encourage him to compete in the arena. Shirou was initially happy to agree. However, in the end, he was persuaded by Artoria to step back. Taking his place in the arena, she battled Lamorak, defeating him quite soundly. Obviously, Lamorak, who was once known as one of the 3 great lions of Britain alongside Lancelot and Tristan, was no longer a match for the rapidly growing Artoria. Artoria's possession of the Red Dragon Heart, abundant magical energy, and superior physical attributes such as strength and agility contributed to her overpowering Lamorak. However, it should also be noted that she consulted with Merlin on swordsmanship, which further enhanced her skills in combat. It would not be an overstatement to say that she is truly the sword saint of Britain. In just 3 days, her swordsmanship had improved significantly, and her skills had surpassed those of renowned knights such as Lamorak. The atmosphere was generally harmonious, but it was unclear why Tristan seemed displeased with Shirou's presence. Whenever he visited to exchange musical skills, Tristan would abruptly turn and run away as if he had seen a ghost. Tristan would even play his violin in the forest at night, drawing fairies to come and listen to his music. However, whenever Shirou appeared, Tristan would immediately flee, moving as fast as the fairies themselves and almost as swiftly as Merlin. Shirou was utterly perplexed by Tristan's behavior. Nonetheless, there was something else that was troubling him at the moment. "There are more soldiers coming to Caerleon Castle." He sat by the window of the inn, observing the soldiers wandering the streets below, and his gaze narrowed slightly. "Isn't this to be expected? The day of your coronation as king is drawing near, and it's a significant event in history. With the threat of Vortigern, the northern kings cannot attend the coronation ceremony personally. However, they should at least send envoys to participate. Otherwise, it would be considered disrespectful." Shirou heard a soft male voice in his ear and turned his head to see Merlin sitting on a chair, wearing a silver dress resembling a flower, nibbling on an apple. Fo was sleeping soundly on his shoulder. Shirou made a disgusted expression and asked, "When did you come to my room again?" "Just now," Merlin said. "You need to stop coming into my room for no reason, Merlin. Why don't you go out and flirt with some random woman or something?" Merlin pointed to his dress with a pouty expression and said, "Can you imagine me going out and meeting people in this dress?" Shirou chuckled, glancing at Merlin's outfit. "I think you secretly enjoy it, Merlin. Besides, you're the one who customized the clothes yourself. Remember when you introduced yourself to the Archbishop as Merlin's apprentice Magus? You were so excited but ended up being looked down upon. Tsk, tsk. I'll never forget that priceless look on your face." Merlin slumped on the table, appearing even more disheartened. Shirou couldn't help but laugh at Merlin's dejected appearance. Nowadays, Merlin had no time to flirt outside as he was preoccupied with teaching Artoria swordsmanship. Furthermore, he was being forced by Kay to wear women's clothing, causing him to look quite forlorn. Just 2 days ago, he had been unfairly judged and looked down upon by the Archbishop, which had left Merlin with a comical expression on his face. Shirou had to stifle a laugh at the memory. "Foo!" Fo took a quick glance at Shirou and Merlin before rolling over and falling asleep on the table. Shirou couldn't help but feel emotional as he gazed at Fo. Perhaps it was fate that brought Fo into Merlin's life. Despite initially imitating Shirou, she ended up becoming Merlin's familiar. Shirou had asked Fu about the reason for her decision, and she had replied with an expectant expression. "He promised to show me the most beautiful thing in the world, even better than grilled meat." He sighed, realizing that poor Fu had fallen for one of Merlin's tricks. "I don't have time to waste on you. I have important matters to attend to," said Shirou, as he donned his armor and draped his white cloak over his shoulders. He strode toward the door but paused to address Merlin. "Oh, and Merlin, before you go, please remember to wipe down the chairs you sat on with a cloth." Merlin looked up at him and asked, "Why?" "I find it a bit disgusting," replied Shirou before turning to leave. Merlin was left speechless and collapsed onto the table and sighed. Suddenly, he raised his head and muttered, "I think I forgot to remind him of something." Shirou strode out of the inn and greeted the civilians and soldiers who passed by with a friendly smile. As he reached a large square, he noticed a crowd of people gathered there, all shouting his name. Amidst the cheers of the crowd, he climbed onto the stage. Instead of delivering a speech, he chose to impart his wisdom to the people. Merely using passionate and enthusiastic language without substance can quickly wear out the audience. Therefore, Shirou would occasionally share some modern wisdom to gain prestige. Although he didn't possess an extensive range of wisdom to impart, he did have one simple yet essential skill that he had mastered: arithmetic. During his speeches, he taught the basics of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, all within the range of 1 to 100. Multiplication and division proved challenging for many people, and they struggled to grasp the concepts. Nevertheless, the audience found his teachings to be profound wisdom, eagerly studying and shouting out the name of Arthur while expressing their gratitude to him for sharing his knowledge. It's true that basic arithmetic operations like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division within the range of 1 to 100 are commonly taught to kindergarten children. As such, it may not seem particularly profound. However, during the era in which Shirou lived right now, and particularly in ancient Britain, such skills were considered the mark of a wise man. As noon approached, he concluded his speech and dismissed the crowd. He made preparations to return to his lodgings for lunch. During this era, people did not adhere to the concept of 3 meals a day, typically only consuming breakfast and dinner. However, he had grown accustomed to 3 daily meals due to his modern upbringing. During their year at the estate, Artoria would sometimes remark that Shirou had a greater appetite than she did, given his preference for eating more frequently. As Shirou began to pack his belongings and prepare to depart, he suddenly heard a familiar voice. "Arthur!" Shirou turned around and saw Gawain approaching him in a luxurious carriage. He stopped and smiled upon seeing Gawain approach. "Gawain, what brings you here?" Gawain shook his head. "It's not that I have something to discuss with you, but," he began, only to be interrupted by a gentle woman's voice from the carriage. "You must be my younger brother, Arthur." Shirou felt a shiver run down his spine and unconsciously raised his eyebrows, sensing a familiar scrutiny. The gem-encrusted gold-edged curtains of the open carriage parted, revealing a hand with a white silk long sleeve that drew them aside. A pretty face that bore a striking resemblance to Artoria's emerged from behind the curtains. The woman was dressed in a formal bright yellow gown, adorned with exquisite gemstones. Her golden hair cascaded down her delicate shoulders and chest, adding to her dignified and elegant appearance. Morgan Le Fay. Shirou hesitated for a moment before asking, "Are you my sister, Morgan?" "It appears that Merlin has already mentioned me to you, Arthur," replied Morgan, smiling slightly. She then drew back the curtains of the carriage and stepped out gracefully. A handsome young man extended his arm to Morgan, and she draped her arm over his, pulling up the hem of her dress as she stepped out of the carriage. She smiled at the young man and said, "Thank you, Gaheris." "Don't mention it, mother," replied Gaheris, falling back. Morgan's gaze swept over the people around her and landed on a young man with a gloomy face. She ordered, "Gaheris Agravain, you can take the carriage aside for now. I want to have a good chat with my brother." Gaheris looked at Agravain with some hesitation, but still smiled and nodded. "As you wish, mother." Agravain also nodded in agreement, and the two of them led the carriage away. Morgan turned to Shirou and asked in a graceful manner, "Would you be so kind as to accompany your sister for a drink, my dear little brother?" Shirou was surprised by Morgan's unexpected visit and wondered to himself, "How could Merlin not warn me about this? Doesn't he fear that I'll accidentally expose our secret?" Despite his inner turmoil, Shirou managed a smile and responded, "Certainly, sister. While I've only heard of you from Merlin and Ector, I've longed to meet you in person." Morgan chuckled and covered her mouth as she teased, "If you had truly wanted to meet me, you wouldn't have avoided me in Tintagel, making it impossible for me to see you." Shirou replied with a smile, "But didn't you worry about me and keep watching over me afterwards?" The moment he saw Morgan, he had already realized that the scrutinizing gaze that had been watching him for the past 2 months was from her. She smiled. "You are quite the sweet talker, and I must say it's quite charming." Shirou escorted Morgan to a nearby tavern. As they walked, he couldn't help but notice how much Morgan resembled Artoria in her adult form. She wore a bright yellow formal dress that accentuated her noble and elegant beauty. Morgan's striking beauty was an extreme temptation for men, and as they walked, many passers-by couldn't help but look at her as if they were under a charm. However, Gawain stood behind Morgan in silence, his towering and muscular physique making people hesitant to gaze for too long. At the tavern, Shirou ordered 2 drinks, one for himself and another for Morgan. As the glasses arrived, he lifted a glass of wine and offered it to Morgan, a sincere expression on his face. "My dear sister, I must apologize for avoiding you in Tintagel. Please forgive me. Allow me to raise this glass in a toast to you." He took a sip from his glass and waited for Morgan's response. Morgan chuckled lightly and replied, "You are such a sensible child." Shirou placed his glass back down and gazed at Morgan. He wasn't sure of Morgan's intentions in visiting Caerleon Castle, but he was skilled in socializing, thanks to his modern upbringing. As they sipped their drinks, he attempted to strengthen his relationship with her. He couldn't predict what she had in mind, but more importantly, he didn't know if she had uncovered his true identity as the proxy king recommended by Merlin. He had hoped to glean some information from Morgan by toasting to her, but while she accepted his gesture, she did not offer any answers to his questions, instead smiling politely. "She's a sly old fox," he groaned inwardly, realizing that his tactics were not going to work. He decided to abandon his sneaky thoughts and simply enjoy the drinks and conversation with Morgan. As they laughed and joked, time seemed to slip away second by second. Suddenly, Shirou's heart skipped a beat as he saw Artoria walking down the street, holding a loaf of bread. Oh no! Panic flooded his heart. In the same moment, Artoria caught sight of him and called out, "My king!" Morgan turned her head to follow his gaze, and her alluring gaze fell upon Artoria, who bore a striking resemblance to her. Morgan's face lit up with a faint smile as she gazed upon her. "Oh, is this my little sister? You do look a lot like me," she remarked. "But—" Morgan's attention then shifted to Shirou, and with a charming smile she asked, "Why don't you look like me, my dear little brother, Arthur?" Shirou was caught off guard by Morgan's sudden question and could feel his face flush with embarrassment. After regaining his bearings, Shirou faced Morgan's questioning with a calm smile and replied, "Dear sister, this question can only be answered by God, for our appearance is not something we can control." Morgan laughed while covering her mouth, displaying her elegance. "That's true." Just then, Artoria approached them, and her blue eyes fell on Morgan's face, which was strikingly similar to her own, causing her to freeze in surprise. Shirou quickly cleared his throat and took Artoria's slender arm before she could ask anything. He introduced Morgan first, saying, "Artoria, this is our sister, Morgan Le Fay." Upon hearing this, Artoria felt her heart tighten. She had heard about her sister, who had inherited the power of the island, several times from Ector and Merlin. Why did she seek an audience with the king now? Could it be that she had seen through Guinevere's true identity? Artoria felt a bit nervous and put on a stern expression as she greeted Morgan. "Hello, sister." Morgan thought to herself, what an impolite child. Her first impression of Artoria wasn't great, but since she was still a member of the Pendragon family, Morgan replied blandly, "Hello, my dear sister. By the way, what's your name?" I am Artoria Pendragon," she replied stiffly. "Artoria, a nice name." Morgan nodded in agreement before asking, "By the way, why do you refer to Arthur as king? Doesn't that create a sense of distance?" Artoria didn't know how to answer. In her 15 years of education, Merlin had taught her many things, but he had never taught her how to fool people. Afraid that Artoria might give herself away, Shirou smoothly took over the conversation with a smile. "Actually, Artie now considers herself a knight under my name, so she calls me her king. Speaking of which, Gareth has also become a squire of Gawain. According to the rules, Gareth should also refer to Gawain as Sir or Lord, shouldn't she?" He skillfully shifted the topic, and it worked wonderfully as Morgan's gaze immediately turned to her son. Gawain felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. Shirou thought to himself, "Sorry, Gawain, but you have to be the scapegoat this time." He continued to ask, "By the way, I didn't see Gareth just now. Where is she?" Gawain's forehead began to sweat even more profusely, and his gaze instinctively turned towards the carriage. Morgan cleared her throat and drew everyone's attention. She flashed a graceful smile and said, "As for Gareth, she still needs to review some Magecraft lessons at the hotel, so she hasn't come over." Shirou nodded knowingly, but he didn't believe it at all. He had noticed Gawain's gaze shifting towards the carriage, indicating that Gareth was likely inside. However, he knew that their family matters were not his concern, and the important thing was that the topic had been successfully shifted. Artoria also breathed a sigh of relief. Lying and deceiving didn't come naturally to her, and while she didn't stop Shirou and thought he was doing the right thing, she knew that she couldn't have done it herself. Shirou asked calmly, "By the way, why are you here, sister?" "My dear little brother is about to ascend the throne and become a king. How could I, as his elder sister, not come to celebrate with other nobles from different kingdoms?" Morgan replied with a smile. He was moved to tears and said, "You are so kind, my dear sister." Morgan was pleased with Shirou's response and replied, "I'm glad you think so, Arthur. Well, it's getting late, and I have some things to take care of. Let's say goodbye, my dear little brother," Morgan said as she stood up. She paused for a moment and looked at Shirou before adding, "Oh, I almost forgot. I'm hosting a ball in the castle tonight, and all the nobles from various countries who have come here are invited. You should come too, Arthur." Gawain coughed on the side. Without missing a beat, she added, "Of course. And my sister, Artoria, too." Morgan looked at Artoria with an elegant smile. I won't." Artoria was about to refuse, but Shirou grabbed her arm and smiled at Morgan, nodding. "Of course, my dear sister." Morgan and Gawain left happily. After watching Morgan depart, Artoria hesitated before turning to Shirou and asking, "My king, must I attend the ball as well?" "Of course," Shirou replied firmly. "We cannot afford to raise any suspicions from Morgan." "But, as a knight, I fear I may embarrass you," she admitted with a troubled expression. "Part of being a king is knowing how to socialize," he said with a reassuring smile. "I see, I understand," she nodded, still looking uneasy. Morgan departed with grace, her movements light and elegant, exuding a noble and refined demeanor. A serene smile graced her lips, fully showcasing her aristocratic temperament. "Did I say something wrong, Gawain?" Morgan asked softly. Everything was fine, Mother, except for forgetting to invite Artoria. I'm glad to hear that. Morgan hesitated for a moment before continuing. But did I behave impolitely in any way? Other than being a bit distant towards Artoria, everything was fine, Mother. So that means my demeanor and behavior towards my brother were impeccable, right? Yes, but do not forget to also pay attention to your daughter, Gawain advised. Morgan's expression darkened as she glared at him. You should be the one looking out for your sister. Make sure she doesn't entertain any delusions of becoming a knight. Gawain smiled awkwardly. Morgan made her way back to the carriage with Gaheris's assistance and stepped inside. As soon as she entered, she snapped her fingers, and her illusion immediately vanished. The elegant smile she had been wearing just moments before disappeared along with her bright demeanor, replaced instead by a dark and gloomy aura. After dispelling the illusion, Morgan's bright yellow dress vanished, replaced by a blue-black magical garment. Morgan settled into her seat, and behind her, there appeared to be nothing. But as she was about to sit down, liquid mithril surged up from the ground, shaping itself into a magnificent mithril throne for her to recline upon. Seated upon the liquid metal throne, Morgan cast a cold and aggressive gaze upon the trembling girl beside her. She pursed her lips and addressed Gareth. Is there something you wish to confess? Trembling with fear, Gareth gathered her courage and gritted her teeth. Mother, Morgan fixed her gaze on her, lightly tapping her fingers on the armrest of the silver throne. Tap, tap. The sound echoing like a hammer pounding on Gareth's heart. In an instant, she lost her courage. Nothing, Gareth replied, bowing her head. Morgan's lips curled into a smile. Good girl. Despite the unexpected encounter with Morgan, Shirou remained a person with a strong sense of planning and continued on his way to the military camp, adhering to his own schedule. However, he chanced upon Artoria along the way, and this time she decided to follow him to the camp. As Shirou walked around the military camp, he greeted the leaders he already knew, and they all smiled and returned his greeting. With his sinister intentions, he purposely mixed the armies of various kingdoms together when he assumed the role of Allied Forces commander to prevent conflicts. This strategy allowed him to easily recall the names and faces of the officers throughout the entire army. At first, Shirou believed that his intentions would be easily recognized by others. However, to his surprise, no one had yet figured out his scheme. Everything was proceeding too smoothly. Following behind Shirou, Artoria held on to Caliburn as she observed the scene with longing. She believed that an ideal king should be able to command respect from his people with ease, just as Shirou did. However, she knew that she could never achieve this level of competence. The memory of her failed dream world still cast a lingering psychological shadow upon her. As Shirou toured the military camp, Bedivere hurriedly approached him. What's the matter, Sir Bedivere? He asked curiously, regarding the knight with interest. Before Bedivere could answer, a slightly older young man who stood behind him spoke up. You're Arthur, correct? Shirou turned his attention to the stranger and asked, And you are? Bedivere introduced his brother, saying, Your Excellency Arthur, this is my brother Sir Lucan. Ah, so you are Sir Lucan, Shirou said, recognizing the knight. Lucan was also a member of the Knights of the Round Table, but he did not hold the same rank as Bedivere, who was one of the 12 Knights of the Round Table. Instead, Lucan was simply an ordinary member of the Round Table. In fact, the Knights of the Round Table were not limited to the 12 Knights, which included Lancelot. In total, there were 150 members of the Round Table, all of whom were King Arthur's closest subordinates. These knights came from different countries, classes, and even beliefs, forming a diverse group of loyal followers. From a certain perspective, the Round Table Conference can also be regarded as a highly distorted form of democratic centralism. Although all the Knights of the Round Table were considered equal partners, they often formed factions and engaged in disputes, supporting the knights they admired while attacking others. Among the knights, the 12 knights of the Round Table, led by Lancelot, held the highest prestige, were most admired by their peers, and also comprised the strongest group of knights in the Round Table. Lucan was one of the knights of the Round Table, and also served as King Arthur's chef, cupbearer, and royal steward, who managed the royal court with Kay and Bedivere. "Do you have any business with me, Sir Lucan?" "I have been sent by Sir Uwaine to escort you to Camelot, Your Excellency Arthur," Lucan replied respectfully. Shirou smiled. "It seems that news of my arrival in Caerleon has already reached Camelot." "Actually, Sir Uwaine received news of your arrival on the first day you entered Caerleon Castle. However, as you were staying there for several days, he did not come to greet you." "I see," he remarked, rubbing his chin. Being one of the 3 pillars supporting Camelot for a decade, it was likely that his movement had always been under Uwaine's radar. He looked at Lucan and couldn't help but smile. "Sir Uwaine must have been working hard these days, hasn't he?" Lucan nodded in agreement. "Yes. After you drew Caliburn, envoys from various countries and lords have been arriving in Camelot one after another. However, as you were not present, this—" "I know," Shirou interrupted. He then asked, "But could you wait for me for a day? My dear sister Morgan and I have a ball to attend tonight, and we cannot be absent." "As you wish," Lucan agreed. Shirou nodded as Lucan and Bedivere departed. As he watched Lucan disappear from view, Shirou rubbed his chin, his eyes flickering with a thoughtful expression. "What's on your mind, my king?" Artoria asked. "It's nothing. Let us prepare for the ball tonight," he replied with a smile. "We cannot afford to show any flaws in front of Morgan." "Understood," she replied, her face serious, resembling a warrior preparing for battle. "Relax, Artie. It's just a social event, not a war," he reassured her. "Yes, of course," she replied, her face still tense.